Right after his McLaren contract ended a year earlier than expected, Daniel Ricciardo ran out of competitive options for 2023, and even though he's decided on the upcoming campaign, only time will tell if he'll ever be able to race in F1 again. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix might have been his last Formula One race. Curious? Let's take a look at how he got himself in this situation in the first place. First off, Max Verstappen seemed to replace him at Red Bull in 2018. Well, now that we talk about that, it just seems to be one of the biggest mistakes of his career. Back in 2018, the F1 driver decided to leave the team because of a bunch of key moments. Starting with the first one, it was about 10 months before he put his signature at the bottom of a Renault contract, and we're talking about the time Red Bull signed the two-time world champion, Max Verstappen, to a pretty big contract extension. It turns out that his 2-year deal back in 2019 shifted into a 3-year deal going into 2020. Thanks to that, he was the highest paid driver of the team, which put an end to any rumors of Verstappen leaving for Mercedes. And back then, he was just 20 years old and had just grabbed his second F1 win. Having said that, the deal wasn't easy to digest for Ricciardo, and even though he seemed to always be on great terms with Verstappen personally, this deal definitely created some professional issues. That's because, at this point, it just felt like the team was much more inclined toward the young Dutch teammate, and a bunch of things that happened in 2018 further proved that right. Fast forward to 2018, and Ricciardo was in a contract year. He had signed a 2-year extension back in 2016, and the general agreement was that he was going to stick around for at least another contract cycle unless other competitive teams like Ferrari or Mercedes were interested. Following up, Marco only made Ricciardo's suspicion stronger. If we're talking about the second reason why he left, all fingers point towards the comment made by Helmut Marko, the head of Red Bull's driver program and also a huge supporter of Verstappen. To refresh your memory, right before the Monaco Grand Prix, in the middle of contract negotiations, he said he'd want to win the title with Ricciardo in 2018 and then win it with Verstappen in the next 2 years. As for Ricciardo's agent, he was pretty shocked to hear such a statement, and even though Marco tried to clear his intentions, saying he meant it as a good thing, it was pretty clear that the team's long-term ambitions were focused around the Dutch driver. And that wasn't all. Marco went on to double down on that comment in a meeting with team principal Christian Horner and Ricciardo, telling the Australian what, until then, he had only heard from his agent. With that said, a frustrated Horner definitely tried to cover up the situation, saying that the team didn't think anything like that. But if someone as influential internally as Marco was saying something like that, it just had to be true. And the fact that Ricciardo couldn't win the title back in 2018 only seemed to make things worse for him. But Verstappen didn't win the title until 2021 either. So whether Marco's goal was achievable or not was an entirely different story. The important part was that Marco was implying that Verstappen was the team's focus. Coming up, was Ferrari or Mercedes ever an option? Well, let's just say his amazing performance in his Red Bull days is what may have saved him in Formula One after 2 disappointing seasons at McLaren. And even though he had some interest from Mercedes or Ferrari, it never translated into a deal. Over the years, one thing's for sure, his personality might have damaged his chances of moving to Ferrari because they felt he wasn't serious enough to drive for such a competitive team. In fact, a few years ago, the Italian team seems to have set their focus on a young Charles Leclerc, who was enjoying a pretty impressive rookie season at Alfa Romeo after an amazing rise through the ranks. All of that just to be replaced by Kimi Räikkönen in 2019. And if we're being honest, Ricciardo really wanted to be in the frame for Ferrari back in 2021, but the negotiations never reached a deal. Instead, the team's focus quickly shifted to Sainz instead, whose move created the McLaren opportunity for Ricciardo. Many sources say that the Australian even got a 1-year deal from Mercedes, but we're not sure which season it was. What we do know is that Toto Wolff has always been a great fan of his, and a move to Mercedes was one of his best options, as it would be for any driver racing in the V6 hybrid turbo era, but it never seemed too likely to happen anyway. Not to mention, it didn't take long until he decided to leave Renault. Ricciardo's time at Renault, or Alpine, literally never went the way he thought it would. When he joined, the team was literally struggling to meet the lofty goals they'd set for themselves when returning as a fully fledged manufacturer back in 2016. But let's not forget about their poor leadership structure that had Ricciardo and other drivers shocked at how poorly the team was run. And that's exactly why other F1 drivers like Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri, and Fernando Alonso left the team over the past few years. On the other hand, Ricciardo was inclined towards McLaren's offer and felt that it was time to make the switch. And let's be honest, back then, McLaren was doing pretty great on Brown's vision. And fast forward a few bumps, with a full season left to run on his Renault deal, Ricciardo and Brown agreed on a deal in 2021. Not to forget, while this seemed like a great switch, it was only the start of the next 2 disappointing seasons that changed the course of his F1 career entirely. What's more, let's not forget his 2 seasons at McLaren. It started off with a lot of optimism, but it never turned out how either side wanted it to. We're not forgetting his remarkable win at the Italian Grand Prix, but other than that, it was a disappointing first season, and this year hasn't been any better. And the worst part was that neither the team nor he could seem to genuinely understand why he was struggling so much. And it didn't help that Lando Norris' brilliant form in the other car had him overtaking the Australian in almost every race. Soon enough, Brown announced that there were mechanisms in Ricciardo's contract which could let the team part ways with him if they wanted to. That wasn't true though, because all the exit clauses were exclusively on Ricciardo's side. Either way, the team was eventually considering signing Oscar Piastri, and even though the relationship between Ricciardo and McLaren had been pretty great throughout the saga, it all ended this year, leaving Ricciardo with hardly any competitive options. Up next, is Ricciardo going to come back to the F1 grid? Well, for now, it seems like he's set to take on the reserve driver role with Red Bull for next year, which is probably going to involve demonstration runs, simulator sessions, and a bunch of marketing. On the other hand, Mercedes was offering the Australian a full-on reserve role, while Red Bull is allowing him to loosely associate with a competitive F1 team for next year to give him a break he needs from the sport, while also giving him a chance to be able to come back on the grid in 2024. So, if we're being honest, you're probably gonna see him with social media commitments in 2023. On the other hand, he's not too sure about embracing the role of an on-screen personality because he fears that people are just gonna think he's done with F1, crushing any hopes of his comeback in 2025. Because he's said it time and again that he's gonna come back with vengeance, and it's also why he hasn't moved to NASCAR or IndyCar despite the rumors and invitations. He just doesn't want to race anywhere else right now because his heart and mind are set on Formula 1. Having said that, if Red Bull's relationship with Sergio Perez isn't that great next year, it'll be the perfect opportunity for Ricciardo to step in and fill the void. And with that, he's going to be able to return with a team that's probably going to be running at the front end of the pack. Finally, there might be a chance with Audi in 2026. Other than Red Bull, we can't seem to find an obvious route back for now. Mercedes and Ferrari seem set, with their current lineups extending beyond 2024, and moving back to Alpine and McLaren doesn't seem likely. Having said that, there's still one possibility. Audi's arrival in 2026 might open doors for the Australian, as the German manufacturer is gonna try to be instantly competitive under F1's new rules. Obviously, they're gonna need an F1 superstar for that, and Daniel Ricciardo is probably going to be the only one who's available. But then again, he'd have to race somewhere in 2024 and 2025 to be in the frame. But it's definitely worth a shot. That's a wrap for this video. What's your take on Daniel Ricciardo's journey along the way? Do you think he's going to be racing on the F1 grid anytime soon? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.